to
Great.
Okay. All right. The other thing is that Caleb is going to be monitoring the chat, so that if there's a question that you'd like to ask via chat, that you can send that to Caleb, and he will chime in and ask that question as well. Also, just to warn you, I am a baby boomer, and what that means is that I can use technology, but I really don't understand it. And so I'm going to attempt something that, in all honesty, I've never done before, which is screen share on Zoom. So we'll see how this works. All right, let's see here. Screen share. All right. I should have messed around with this a little bit before, Caleb.
What are you seeing at this point?
Not much of anything. I'm trying to get my my PowerPoint presentation up.
So if you have, do you have that up in another window?
I do.
Okay. So when you click the screen share, then it should give you an option of, you should maybe see a couple different things, and one of them should be the PowerPoint. And if you click that, that should share it.
Ah, there we go. I had to get to the right tab. All right, let's see what it's doing. I click share.
Okay, I think you're in the right place. It's just thinking here.
Yeah, my computer sometimes is a little bit on the slow side. Okay.
All right, I think we see it.
All right. Fantastic. Except that's not the first slide. There we go. All right. So this evening there's really two main parts to my presentation, and the first is we want to talk about what are the most important concepts for effective church leadership, because the reality is that for most pastors, their seminary experience doesn't talk at all, at least mine didn't, about how one leads a church. I was taught how to be a preacher, a biblical expositor. I was taught some principles of pastoral counseling, but church leadership, nope, not a thing. So when it came to learning about church leadership, it was a sink or swim, on the fly, by the seat of your pants sort of learning. And I was very blessed to have a lot of very gracious people along the way to help me work at this. But here's some things that I've learned along the way. And what I've learned is that the three most, or I should say the most important concepts for effective church leadership is vision, mission, purpose. That you really need to know what your vision is. And George Barna describes vision as a description of a preferable future. So what the vision is what do we want our future to be? What do we believe that God is calling us to become? The second thing in that is your mission. And your mission is how you're going to operationalize your vision, or how you're going to put it into action. So first comes that vision. Where or what is God calling us to become? The mission is, what is God calling us to do to be, so that we can get to where we are supposed to be, or become who we are supposed to be. And then that third is the purpose. And the purpose is the values that guide the mission in operationalizing the vision. Now, I tend to try to reduce things down to something that I can really understand, because sometimes concepts, I can spout the the more academic meanings and phrases and all of that, but that's not always helpful. So here's something that I use to help me keep straight what is the difference between vision, mission, and purpose. And that is, vision is the destination. That's where we want to go. That's vision. Mission, well, that's the route we're going to take to get there. So if you can think of almost as this as a trip, where do you want to go? That's your vision. What roads are you going to take to get there? That's your mission. And then the purpose, well, that's the vehicle or the mode of transportation that's going to get you there. That if your vision is to go to Hawaii, you're not going to do it on a bicycle. You'll have to do it either on a boat or a plane. And so that's also, the way to think about this is with your mission, your vision, mission, and purpose is that once you identify where it is that you want to go, then you can start working on how are we going to get there? What's the way we're going to get there? How are we going to get from where we're at to where we want to be? But you have to also pay attention to the purpose. Purpose is those values. Why are you doing what you're doing? If you don't know why you're doing it, then it's really easy to lose your focus and to really not get your mission fully engaged, so that you never really start to identify, or I should say, start to move towards that destination or vision. Now, I think there's actually, and I just pulled these out, there's lots of verses you can use for vision, mission, purpose, but these are just three that I pulled out just to say the Bible really does have these. Vision, Revelation 21, 3-5, is that passage that says, and now the dwelling of God will be with men and women, and he will be their God, and they will be his people. He will wipe every tear from their eye. There will be no more crying or death or mourning or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He was seated on the throne, said, behold, I am making everything new. Well, that's the destination. That's where we're all headed. That's, if you will, that's God's vision. That's what God has in mind as the ultimate end for what God is up to. The mission, how that gets operationalized, well, we all know Matthew 28, go ye therefore into all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey whatsoever I commanded you, and lo, I will be with you always, even unto the end of the earth. Now you know how old I am. Memorized it in the King James. But I mean, that's how that vision of getting to that place where we are with God and God is with us, and there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain. Well, it's through the proclamation of the gospel. The purpose, the values that drive that, Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are the two greatest commandments upon which depend all the law and the prophets. So vision, mission, purpose. Now there's other ways that you can look at the scripture and pull out vision, mission, purpose. But hopefully that illustrates the difference between these three. What's vision, what's mission, and what's purpose. So I thought I'd also throw up some things from Harrisonburg Mennonite that we've worked on in terms of our vision and mission and purpose, to give you another example of how we have worked at it. And our vision, and I should say, this is something we repeat every Sunday morning in both of our worship services. We hold this vision before us all the time. A vision that you write and then stick on the shelf and never look at isn't a vision. It doesn't mean anything unless you are going to take it seriously and memorize it, put it in front of you, and have it be that which you're really aiming towards. It's not going to do you any good. So here's our vision statement. Harrisonburg Mennonite Church is an Anabaptist community of disciples of Jesus Christ, bringing God's healing and hope to our neighbors and our world through the power of the Holy Spirit. So that's what we believe that God is calling us to become. This community of disciples, bringing God's healing and hope to our neighbors and our world through the power of the Spirit. So the mission then that we're engaged in is that God calls us to be a community of faith, engaging with God in worship, with each other in discipleship, and with our neighbors in friendship. So here are things that we are doing, and the mission these are things that we can evaluate. These are things we can ask: are we actually doing these things in a way that's moving us towards that vision of being that Anabaptist community through which God's healing and hope are flowing out into our neighborhood? Are our worship services accomplishing that? With discipleship, what ways in which we are discipling each other, as well as those who join us, either wander through our doors and have no clue what church is all about, or are coming in from other congregations. How do we engage with each other? So we have various discipleship ministries, from small groups to what we call our discipleship communities, to other Bible studies, to other ways in which people join together one with another for purposes of discipleship. And then that last one of engaging with our neighbors in friendship, that we want to have an impact, a positive impact upon our community or communities. And so part of this is to ask the question, how are we engaging with our neighbors? What kind of relationship do we have with our neighbors? And it's our neighbors here right around our building, but also our neighbors around where our members live. How are we engaging with them? Are we engaging with them in friendship? Are we being, if you will, invitational in the way in which we relate to those that live around us, and that we interact with at least on a regular basis? And then our value statements. I didn't put all these on because we have a whole list of value statements. But what we did was we took our value statements and we put them right into our giving plan. And so we have various values statements around community and fellowship, and then we have those right in our giving plan, how we're going to fund those. Worship, how are we going to fund that? Spiritual growth and discipleship, all the various ways in which we fund that. Mission evangelism, again, and stewardship. So these are the ways in which we keep our value statements also in front of us, that we have them in front of us every time we have a financial report. People see these things. These are the reasons why we're doing it. These are the vehicles that we're using to operationalize that mission of being that community of faith that engages with God in worship, with each other in discipleship, and our neighbors in friendship. And then also that vision of being an Anabaptist community through which God's healing and hope move into our community. Now, there are multiple ways to develop and embrace vision, mission, and purpose. George Barna's original book said that the best way to have an organization have a vision is with a visionary leader, and that he, in his study of various organizations, and some of them were for-profit corporations, some of them were not-for-profit. George Barna also does work with churches and things like that. And in his first book, what he wrote is that you need somebody who has the ability to have and communicate that, and he called it a macro vision, the big vision, to which everybody in the organization can ascribe to and join and do. He later backed off of that a bit and said that vision can come from actually within an organization. And I'm going to say for most of our churches, with the exception of brand new church plants, that brand new church plants tend to have a visionary founding pastor, and so they're in a different category. But for those of us who are part of a congregation that has been around for a number of years, there probably already is a vision of some kind that's there. Now, it may not be well developed, it may not be communicated very well, but it's probably there. And so one of the roles of leadership is to uncover what that vision is. There's, again, multiple ways to do that. What we do here at Harrisonburg Mennonite is once every 4 to 5 years, we have a strategic planning process, and we are engaged in one of those right now. And we've used various questionnaires to ask people things such as, what does our church do well? What does our church not do well? If there were one thing that you would really like to see our church become, what would it be? Ways of getting people to dream and to think. And what you're going to hear, or I should say, what you will find out with questionnaires and things, is what most of the people are thinking. Now, this is not just a wet your finger and stick it in the wind and see which way it's blowing and then and get on board with that, but it's rather a way to discern if there is in fact already a vision operating within your congregation. It may very well be. Another way to get at vision is to look at the church's history. Harrisonburg Mennonite Church started as an outreach to the children in the area, in the Parkview area and in North Harrisonburg, way back in the 1930s. And so part of the vision of Harrisonburg Mennonite Church has always been to reach out and to be a place for children to be safe and to find a meaningful relationship with a loving God. And that's through us. So to say that's always been part of our vision. So sometimes history can really be important. And sometimes if the church is in a reimagining or recasting of who it is, that to spend that time with the leadership groups in prayer and asking for the Spirit's guidance. What is it that God really wants us to do? And to listen and to start testing some of those and to put out maybe not a questionnaire that says, what is it that you think our church should become, but rather it might be helpful to say, we're wondering about these things. Which of these do you think God is calling us to do or to become, and to help work then in developing the vision that way. And once that vision, that preferable future, that destination is identified, then you can start working on mission. And I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about a way to operationalize mission, but to say that once you have that vision, then you can start asking, okay, how are we going to do this? Like with Harrisonburg Mennonite, to go back again, with the vision partially being providing a safe place for children to hear about the good news and to experience God's love through others. One of the ways in which we do that is through our Wednesday evening activity. Right now, we are bringing any number of children just from the community who have no other connection to our church other than they're willing to get on our church bus and come to our Wednesday evening programming. They get a meal. There's singing. There's other things that we have people do with the kids. I mean, they sit at the table and eat with them. They hear good news. And so that's one way in which we're continuing that vision that started way back in the 1930s. So I mean, that's soon going to be 100 years old, of reaching out to the kids in the community. So to say there are multiple ways to do that, and then you have to get at that purpose, which is, what are the values that are driving what we're doing? Why do we do what we do? I would hope that most churches would have very similar purpose statements. And I think for most Mennonite churches that we're not going to be all that far apart from each other in those values. I mean, we're going to value things such as reconciliation. We're going to value such things as simplicity. We're going to value such things as working towards being genuine disciples of Jesus and those sorts of things, those values that we have. But there could be some things, excuse me, that are unique to your congregational setting, and that's okay. But to ask the question, what are the values that are behind what we're doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? And then you might be asking, do we really have to do all this work? I mean, developing vision, working at mission, discovering our purpose, those values? The short answer is, if you don't, you won't get anywhere. It is a bit of that old cliche that we've all heard. If you aim for nothing, that's exactly what you'll hit. If you don't have a destination, you'll never know which way to go. If you don't have a plan to get there, you're not going to get anywhere. If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing it, nobody's ever going to be motivated to be a part of it. So it is important to take that time to develop a clear vision. And vision doesn't have to be this way out there crazy goal. Some churches do have them, those way out crazy goals. That's all right. But and I should say too that vision can change. That you're not establishing a vision that's got to last for all of eternity. If you want to establish a vision saying, I think we can get to here, whatever it is, and have that be your vision, then you could work on, all right, how are we going to do that? And why do we want to do this? You don't need to have these, years ago were called BHAGs. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that term, a BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. That you don't necessarily need to have one of those. It's where is it that God wants us to go? That's the vision. And how are we going to get there? That's the mission. And why we're doing it, that's the purpose. It's worth taking the time to do it. There are lots of resources out there. I'm going to share just a few on particularly more on mission, but on developing vision, working at your mission, and uncovering your purpose. Those resources are out there. And if you need help, at least until the end of August, you can holler at me. My time on ICLT will end then, but holler at me. I'd be glad to spend some time with you and pastors or with your church leadership to help work on some of these. All right. Now, here we're going to get into more of the mission. Is there a better way to understand the working relationship between governance, in other words, church council, elders, whatever governance structure you have in place, and operations, or the pastors? I should say I'm going to warn you that this is all part of an orientation for church council that I used. And it's been a number of years since we've done it here at Harrisonburg Mennonite, but to help onboard church council members as to their role and their the expectations of church council, elders, and the pastoral staff. So this is designed then for a church of, well, we've got officially, I don't know, what is it, Regina, 700 members, whatever it is. Our worship attendance is about 350. I say our sphere of ministry is probably about 600. So we are a larger church. These principles, though, will apply to a church of any size. It's just how they get put into practice is going to change. So just so you are aware of where I got this slideshow, that this is not something that I made up in the last 2 weeks. And actually, I borrowed this from Mennonite Church USA, and very specifically from Mennonite Mission Network. This is how we approached governance. And so, Steve, I don't know if this looks vaguely familiar to you. I mean, I realize you were staff, but whether or not you got all of this orientation to policy governance, yay, nay, a little bit. Okay, stayed away from it as much as you could, huh? All right. Well, the concept where I'm getting a lot of this material is from a concept that's called policy governance. And what policy governance is a way to clearly identify what is the role of, if you will, lay leadership, and what is clearly the role of the pastor or the pastoral staff. because often we find ourselves getting lost in the weeds as to who's responsible for what. And when we get lost in the weeds of who's responsible for what, everything grinds to a halt. And so if we have a much better idea of what the church lay leadership is to be doing and what the church staff leadership is to be doing, it really makes things much more understandable. And it's much easier then to get on with the mission and know who's responsible for what, and also creates much better accountability as to who should be doing what. And so this starts with the church council, or if you have elders or a church board or whatever, that their main job is to act on behalf of the members. That's their main job. Their main job then is not to support the staff, which is interesting, isn't it? It's to act on behalf of the members. So, policy governance is a redesign of the role of a board or church council that emphasizes values and vision, purpose, vision, and empowerment of both board and staff, so that empowerment of both board and staff, when you get to staff, that's where the mission is put into practice. So it's a redesign, it's a rethinking of what actually is the role of church council or your ruling elders or whatever structure that you have. So in the case of Harrisonburg Mennonite Church, the council acts on behalf of Harrisonburg Mennonite, so vision, mission, and values are put into practice. The fancy word is operationalized. And council then is where oversight authority resides. So what this does is it focuses the authority and it focuses the accountability. It's not, many of your bylaws and or constitutions may say the congregation is the final authority. This does not conflict with that at all. It's not saying that you have to become turn your church council into a church board that has all the power. That's not what I'm saying here, not what this is doing, but rather what it is saying is it becomes very clear where the authority and the accountability lies. And when it comes to establishing vision and identifying purpose, it's very clear that that rests with church council or your ruling elders or whatever you have, so that they can then hold staff accountable for the ministry and the mission that is to be happening. So it's where that oversight authority resides, again, on behalf of the congregation. Now, there are challenges for church council, and one of them is certainly to pull together an unbiased aggregate of congregational ideas, intentions, and aspirations. That's called finding out what your vision is, and also your values. That's a very tall task. I mean, it's not that church council has nothing to do. No, they have some really important work to do. Again, this is acting on behalf of the congregation. So it is pulling together that unbiased aggregate of congregational ideas, intentions, and aspirations, and then doing something with those. And what it is then to choose a focused direction for action. If you will, it is the lay leadership in most settings. Again, church plants are different. But in terms of most established congregations, it is the church council or church board or board of elders, or when I was in Indiana, it was the board of deacons. They're the ones who have the responsibility to choose and set a focused direction for action. And why this is important is that this is what establishes the boundaries for what the pastor or pastors do, and any other lay volunteers who are putting feet and to the vision, and who are putting this vision into action. that it's really necessary to do that. The other thing that this does, it allows you to say, you know, that might be a really great idea, but it's not what we're about. Focus. One of the things that churches do is they'll hear a great idea from somebody, you know, typical. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. I was at another church and here's their bulletin and look at what they're doing. Aren't these all great ideas? Well, they're great ideas for that church because of their vision and mission, but they don't necessarily fit with what we're trying to do here. So it helps you to know what you are to be doing and what you're not to be doing. Because there's no church that's big enough to be able to do everything. I don't care how big the church is. You need to have a very focused direction for action. That's the responsibility of the church council. And then the other thing that the challenge for church council is to safeguard and nurture the relationship of the council to the congregation. In other words, church council needs to be in constant communication with the congregation. Again, this is to open up accountability. It is to promote transparency. It is to create those ways for feedback to get into the system very quickly. One of the things that we did here and for a number of years, and COVID kind of put an end to it, and we haven't restarted it yet, but once a month we would have an elder and a church council member available for any member to come and say whatever it is they wanted to say to those two people about. Sort of a listening time. It was a way to nurture that relationship. And it was also a way that you got feedback really quite quickly. If something was going well, somebody usually show up and tell you. If something wasn't going well, I'll guarantee you somebody would show up and tell you. But you got that feedback right away. It really was a way of again, that accountability being baked right into it so that you didn't have the sense of what's going on, who's responsible for what, how do I get my concerns into the system? I see this need here. Is there some way it can be addressed? All of those things get fed into the system a lot more quickly when your leadership group is paying attention to that relationship with the congregation. Okay, let's talk a little bit then. I'm missing the top of that. I can't read the top line there. Something about policy governance. Well, accountability. Council has an obligation to the congregation. Again, that the role of the council in our case is to communicate with the congregation, to listen to the congregation, to be accountable to the congregation. Also to practice servant leadership. One of the things that policy governance is built on is the idea of servant leadership. If you're not familiar with servant leadership, there's a whole series of trainings that you can look at and books and materials on servant leadership. It is the whole idea of council being both the servant and the leader of the congregation, that this is not about a group that has unfettered authority to do whatever they want when they want to do it with no accountability. No, the council is both the servant and the leader of the congregation. And then there's also this clarity of group values, that the council is vested with group responsibilities and authority. And so it is up to the church council to make sure that those values are part of everything that happens. Whether it is staff that's doing it or whether it's other lay people who are engaged in ministry, that's all part of church council's responsibility. And when we're all talking about the same thing, when we're all moving in the same direction, when we're all working at growing those values and things together, it does help everybody to know how to get involved, and ways in which their gifts can be used in the church, which is then about empowerment. Now, this is, again, designed specifically for Harrisonburg Mennonite Church, but council allows the staff, in our case, or if you're a solo pastor, that your leadership allows you the latitude to make decisions, to try new ways, and to make mistakes, because we'll all do them. To do something, say, we're going to try this. And when you evaluate it, go, you know what? That didn't work. That was a flop. Great. Now you know what not to do. But what policy governance does is it allows for a great deal of latitude for staff, a pastor, pastors, lay ministry volunteers to work at how are we going to get these things done. That and that's done well on behalf of the owners. And I'll just really quickly go that there's the legal owners that are defined by the bylaws. They're the moral owners, and they're the members of your church. But so when it comes to the church council functions, church council pays attention to the values, and they in our case, we work those into actionable statements, and policy governance calls those ends. There are end statements and mean statements. Now, I'll say this, that we worked really hard, and we followed this thing. We had a really rather detailed policy statement with all the 4 quadrants and everything else, and I'm not going to get into all of that. It was an awful lot of paperwork. And even for us, it proved to be a little bit unwieldy. For an organization like Mennonite Mission Network, you need something like that. For most churches, it's way too complicated. So while I'm going to give you some bibliography at the end here, I'm going to say, in spite of what you will hear, which is you're either all in or all out of policy governance. No, you can use some principles and take some things out of it and apply it to your setting. But the important thing is that what your leadership group, and in our case, our church council, is doing is that it is keeping track of what the vision is, and it is working on what do we really want to see accomplished. I'll get a little bit into that. And also then hold the leadership team, which in our case, pastoral staff, accountable for achieving those ends, which also in our case includes fiscal responsibility. And then church council communicates with the members. So we had talked about that. So how does these concepts potentially add value? Well, it translates owners' expectations into organizational performance. In other words, that as church council is paying attention to that relationship, then those expectations are clear. And so they get right into the very fabric of the church. And what then is the responsibility of the pastors? Well, it's to develop and implement ministries plans to achieve the ends. What often happens with church council is church council will develop a bunch of things to do and then hand to the staff and say, here's your job. That's backwards. It's absolutely backwards. Which of your church council members have ever pastored a church, have ever been in ministry? Maybe somebody's got somebody on their church council that did, but you have lay people who are great leaders, who know about vision, who can identify it, who can work at it. But pastors are the ones who know about ministry and know how to take those things and put feet on them, get them working. Pastor's responsibility is to embody the values and the vision of Harrisonburg Mennonite Church. I'm kind of running out of time here, so but the other thing is, in our case, it was for particularly the lead pastor, is to hold staff accountable to the ends, or those things that we're trying to accomplish, and then to also submit written reports for ends monitoring. So ends. Ends relate not to what we will be doing, but to the difference we intend to make in people's lives. There's your vision. What difference do you really want to make in people's lives? And you can have multiple statements with that. I mean, we have multiple statements about the difference we want to make in people's lives. I talked about the children. We also talk about the difference we want to make in the lives of our seniors around us, because we have a growing number of seniors, and the population is graying. So we have some statements about that, the difference that we want to make in people's lives, the difference we want to make in the lives of youth and young adults. We have those statements, and then those are the kinds of things that church council develops, and then staff figures out how to make those things happen. Ends gets right to the heart of why a congregation exists. Again, that mission. Why are we here? What difference do we really want to make in our communities and in the lives of people? That what this does is it establishes appropriate boundaries. There are the prescriptive boundaries, and again, these are the things that church councils tend to want to do. Tell staff exactly what to do. Well, maybe what's better is to say what's not acceptable. Trust your staff. That you call somebody to be pastor. A prescription reduces creativity. Proscription opens possibilities for creative solutions. Prescriptions minimizes the expertise that your pastor already has. Proscription empowers staff to leverage that expertise into doing new things. So for church leadership, lay leadership in particular, think about those proscriptions and the ways to create, if you will, where the playing field actually is. I mean, I am continually impressed with the quality of pastors that we have in Virginia Conference, and the pastors that I rub shoulders with. We have really great people in positions of ministry, and they're not going to play baseball, in foul ground. They're going to be on the field. And so rather than telling them, you know what, you can only play shortstop, when in reality, they've got a great arm that can throw a slider like you can't believe. Or, whatever baseball analogy you want to use. But to let them be creative, identify where the playing field is, and let them figure out how to win the game. And more often than not, your pastors will figure out how to win the game. Now, this is again part of policy governance. There's something that's to be said about this, and that is, with full policy governance, you have this whole set of quadrant of limitations policies, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But things for your church council or your board or whatever to worry about, if you will, not really worry, but to keep in front of them. One of them is treatment of staff. That you want to make sure that your staff are resourced, that they are the expectations are reasonable, particularly for the level of compensation that you're able to give. Pastors on the whole tend to be workaholics. That it's very rare that you're going to run into a pastor that you have to wonder, did they really get their hours in this week? Most of the time it's, we are paying you full time, but that does not mean a 60-hour work week. So it's to pay attention to those kinds of things. It also is to pay attention to those financial activities and condition of the organization as a whole. Most churches that you're going to have lay people handling the finances. So there's a much greater connection to the church council. There's also the financial planning and budgeting, again, that most church councils will do. In our case, actually, the initial financial planning is done by staff. It then goes to a our stewardship committee, and then on to church council, and then final approvals by the congregation. But however you do it, that it's the responsibility of the church council to make sure that it is done properly, and also that in our case, that what we're doing is within the playing field that church council sets for us, and asset protection. I'm not going to go into that. And then, but then also the relationship between the staff and the congregation. How are they doing with that? Is there are there really good relationships and things between the pastor and the congregation, and then the compensation and benefits? What this is, it's a matter. This concept is about balancing control and freedom. When a church board exerts a whole lot of control and gives very little freedom to staff, the fulcrum point is going to be at a place where results aren't too much. You're not going to get too much elevation. If you give up control, particularly, and I mean, when I say control, it's not accountability, it's creating the program, creating the ministry. If you relinquish that control and give it to your staff for freedom, all of a sudden they can leverage that for much greater results. This is what this is all about. It's being clear as to what's the responsibility of the lay leadership, what's the responsibility of staff leadership. I'm just going to skip through all of this, mostly because we're running out of time. If you want some more information about that, I'd be glad to talk about ends and means with you more privately. Okay, let's get through all of that. All right, some resources in case you're wondering. The Reinventing Your Board. This is John Carver. All right, let's see here. How do I get out of screen sharing? I guess I need to go back to.
Often it's up at the top.
Yeah, here we go. I have a new share. Stop sharing. There it is. All right. Maybe I need to turn that off too. What do you know? That blur my background. It's getting in the way here. There we go. All right, here's one. And I can send you, I have all of your email lists, so I can send this to you if you want. This is simply one. It's a John Carver book. This is his first one, Reinventing Your Board. There's another one that which is Policy Governance. Again, this is going to give you the whole 9 yards of this. Boards that make a difference. These have really very little to do, in fact, nothing to do with church councils and things like that. But it lays out some of these principles of clearly identifying what's the role of, in Carver's case, the board, and what is the role of staff. Some things that have more to do with church. This is another one that I found helpful. Faith-based management. This has to do more with larger organizations than churches, but it again gives you some principles as to the difference between staff and lay people. But more importantly, how do you bring the vision and mission right into the very core of your organization that's faith-based? And then one that is very specifically, and this is an Alban Institute book, Transforming Church Boards. The Alban Institute has all kinds of good resources and things like that. And I can send you the bibliography on those four. I will warn you that my materials, look at the color of my hair, my materials are a little on the old side. That I would have picked this stuff up 20 years ago or more. I think the principles are still very applicable. Well, I have rambled on here for almost an hour and nobody asked any questions or whatever. So let me just say, are there any questions, comments? I think we have the same number that we started with, so nobody got bored in between and just turned me off. Thank you. It was an awful lot, I realized, in a short period of time.
Craig, I'm gonna I'm gonna muddle and meddle here. For folks that are used to a little bit more spirituality-based language, what other words could be used besides organizational management or a lot of the terms you use that for some people their eyes would just glaze over?
Yeah. I think, Pearl, it would be what's going to fit in your setting. I mean, in this book, the Transforming Church Boards, this one's full of all kinds of good stuff in terms of developing that board culture that's really helpful. And this is one talks about worshipful work, about developing this uncovering the spirit of agenda. So it may be, what is it, to use language rather than organizational this, that, or the other, but to talk in terms of what God is calling us to become. Again, it's that vision. These principles and things, use them as they see as they fit. So guess what I'm saying, Pearl, is be creative. Let's move that lever, that fulcrum back and leverage the expertise that you have, particularly in your setting.
I don't know if everybody gets this, but I feel like this last volume here of Leader Magazine gives a number of good perspectives, beginning with recognizing and owning that the congregation is a voluntary participation community. And I think Carver is helpful in keeping a board from micromanaging an organization. And my question, when you apply this, say, to Mission Network, I don't find that the board has been very helpful or was very helpful for a number of years when it came to actually providing guidelines on hard decisions, and then raising questions about what do we do? Do we, how do we, like I, as a person having to report to the board, found that my activities became more and more marginalized over time, because all I reported on was the end statements and what I was doing towards those ends. And so for me, I found the Carver model to have some strengths, but also to have significant weaknesses. And so I found it refreshing to look at some of this and start with a different premise, where the congregation is a voluntary organization. It's not a paid staff. In Warwick River, we've got just the two people, me and, well, three, the janitor, the assistant, and myself as employees. And so there's a disconnect for me between the Carver model and the congregational reality in a small congregation. So
yeah, I appreciate that, Steve, and that certainly that the way in which the Carver model, if applied in its full-blown, all of its glory in a congregational setting, to say, even a church the size of Harrisonburg Mennonite, we found it to be cumbersome. With all of the maintaining all of the things that were required for the document and everything else. And what it did help us do, though, is it did help us focus on why we're really here, and to have church council release some of the things that it was trying to micromanage. The aha moment for our church council was when we spent 45 minutes discussing whether or not we were going to rebuild or replace toilets. And finally, one church council member looked at me after 45 minutes and said, "This is what you've been talking about, isn't it?" Yeah. That somebody else is more than capable of making that decision. So part of it is, Steve, is I think what's helpful is to have the church council thinking in terms of what is it, again, that vision, and to help identify what that vision is. Now, the other thing, that I found that Barna's first book was actually quite enlightening in terms of how vision gets developed. And there are, particularly in a church setting, for a pastor to be the one who is the vision setter can be quite healthy, and quite effective, for energizing and motivating people to get involved in ministry and in the church. Because absolutely right, this is a voluntary organization. People are going to give you 2, 3, 4 hours a week max. How can you effectively use that for meaningful ministry? Those are huge challenges. So yeah, the Carver model, in its all of its glory, works really great for multi-million-dollar organizations that are nonprofits or whatever. It has its limitations with church. No question about it.
The question I wanted to ask, actually, when you were saying it, I wanted to interrupt you and say, could you say more about the unbiased aggregate of congregational ideas, intention, and aspiration? Because yeah, an aggregate is, in a sense, an unhoned aggregate seems to me to be dispersed, and a vision, in a sense, needs to be concentrated. And so an unbiased aggregate, how does that become operational, to use your terms,
Sure.
in reality?
Yeah. I think one of the ways that to pay attention to that unbiased aggregate is it means that people are listened to. I think first and foremost of all, that that as I have experienced that and have worked with that, it is when we are trying to collect opinions and information and data from the congregation, that we want to make sure that we are not dismissing anybody. We're dismissing what could be a minority voice just because it's an unpopular one. That they have a place and should have a place at the table. So their hopes and dreams need to come into that in some way. Now, how we then take that and shape it and mold it into a common direction. Yes, there are things that are going to, if you will, not make the cut. That we're going to say those are important things, but we can't be at those right at the moment. But most people, if they know they've been heard and they know that their opinions have been valued, are going to accept those losses, as opposed to feeling like they just were never heard, they were dismissed, that they weren't really they weren't a meaningful part of the process. They're going to disengage. Great question, Steve. Always,
have
and in all honesty, I do appreciate pushback.
So I have a question about the purpose or value statements and the end statements. Are those things that you share with the congregation at all, or is that primarily just to give direction to church council and staff? You talked about you share the vision statement that gets recited every week, which I remember. But yeah, what about the others?
It depends. When we were working at having that full document, no, it was not shared with the whole congregation. The policy governance document, partly because I don't think it would have made sense to the congregation, the way in which we were working on it, which was we were at least attempted a more strict application of the Carver model. And again, we found that it was too cumbersome to do it into each detail. But an adaptation clearly could be sharing ministry goals. And I think I would use that term rather than end statements. That what are our goals? What are we trying to do? And what are we trying to do? And you can pick out, I mean, we have our 5 areas. What are we trying to do in the area of discipleship? And to say, this is what we're trying to do. What are we trying to do in the area of worship? This is what we're trying to do. And so to have them have those kinds of statements and goals clearly available. Yeah, I mean, we went through the whole thing. We didn't talk about this. You need to have a global end statement, and then you nest all these end statements underneath it, and all of those things. Steve smiling because, oh yeah, I remember all of that. We tried all of that, and again, it got too cumbersome. So I'm not advocating a wooden adoption of the Carver model. I'm saying there's some things, particularly when it comes to the relationship between the lay leadership and the pastor, that I think are still very valuable and helpful. And particularly when it comes to vision, mission, and purpose. Any other questions? Well, I thank you all for being part of this evening. With the interim conference leadership team, we are trying to, I'll use my term, Steve, operationalize our mission, which is to resource pastors and lay leaders and congregants for mission and ministry. And that's the mission statement of Virginia Conference. It's why we are, or I should say, what we are trying to accomplish. So that's the purpose behind this. Again, if I can be of any help to you or your congregation, please let me know. Be glad to share the things that we've worked at here at Harrisonburg Mennonite through the years with our strategic planning processes, where we develop questionnaires and things like that you're welcome to look at. Don't expect anybody to use what we did, but if it helps prime the pump, glad to share that information with you. Or it'd be helpful to talk with someone particularly about vision, mission, and purpose, be glad to do that. So again, thank you for being here this evening. And I think with that,
I would like to say thank you to you for volunteering to do this for us. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think, yeah, people are leaving. So I think we're done. Caleb, I don't know if I can turn off the recording or if you can.
Thank you, Craig.
You're
Very
welcome.
rich. Very
Thank
rich
you.